Hey everybody, I'm Yvonne Williams with Back to Earth Creations, and in this video I want to show y'all how to set a drilled or undrilled stone or cabochon into leather to make a very beautiful necklace or pendant. So let's get started. I'm going to be using a 1 ounce, a quite thin oil tanned cowhide. You could use vinyl or something similar for this. And here I have a template of circles and the stone I'd like to be setting. And I want to establish a few different measurements. First, I want to do the perimeter of the stone, or the circumference rather, which this one looks pretty close. As well as I'm going to want a little bit of a lip going up and around the stone. So I think this one, and then for the final size of the whole piece, I think we're going to be using this one up here. So what I'm going to do, using our circle template, and if you have a stone or a bead that is not circle shaped, you could use a different template, or you could kind of eyeball it. And I'm just going to come in here using an ink pen or something to demark the circumference, and I'm going to do 2 of these. This is one of my favorite projects for using up little bits of scrap leather or second or third use leather. So there we have our 2. And now on one of these, I'm going to try to find the center of it. Get nice and centered up. And you can do this by, here we have, because this is the back side, so I'm just going to line up our stencil, and I'm establishing these crosshairs that it has marked on the stencil, just like that. And so now whenever I come through, and I want to double check just for, measure twice, cut once kind of thing. Yeah, I think this one isn't going to give us enough of a lip over the edge. So this will be the one, and you can see it has these little crosshairs. There'll be a list of tools and materials used in this tutorial down in the video description below. That way you can work with the same exact tools that I'm working with. And we can just line up our little crosshairs. And that kind of helps keep it very centered. And that'll line up pretty nicely. And now I'm going to cut these out, and I'm just going to use some leather shears, and I'm going to start by removing them away from our main piece of leather to make it a lot easier to work with. And then I'm just going to come in and start trimming around the edge like this. Just slow and steady, there's no reason to rush this. But also, if it's a little less than perfect, that's okay. Okay, and then I'm going to do the same thing to the other one. So for cutting out the center part here, we have a couple of different options. You could just go in with a craft knife. You could use a hole punch to kind of whittle the inside out. But my absolute favorite way of going about it is using this corner punch and just lining it up with our line. And then just tapping it through. Doesn't take a whole lot with this thinner leather. And then just lining it up. Tapping it through, trying real hard to just keep the corners, of where the sides meet lined up with each other. Oh, didn't mean to bump the tripod. And then just meet back around to where we started. And there's some variation where it didn't quite meet up perfectly, but you can just come back in, snip that off, and just kind of get everything cleared up, and then you can come through with your scissors and just trim and trim. And then you can come through with a craft knife and clean that up a little bit. Now to get a nice smooth edge here on the inside, we can actually just come in with this edge slicker. But yeah, you can just come in and kind of clean that up a little bit. You could use some gum dragon. I never pronounce it correctly, but I just like to use a little bit of Aussie wax. Just get some on my finger. I mean, a very little bit goes a long way. And this will just act to help clean up and slick down that backside. Just rubbing it in on the front and the back, and then using the tip of my edge slicker to just kind of shape it down and kind of just stretch and rub and buff it in just like that, and that helps tidy it up quite a bit. I think that's way more effective as well on vegetable tanned leather. So now here you can see our two sides are lining up nicely, and I'm going to use a tool called a wing divider. Let me zoom out for you so we can get a better view of all of this. And I'm just going to take our wing divider and size it down quite a bit. I want a very narrow, for lack of a better term, seam allowance to kind of come in. And now I'm going to zoom back in so that y'all can see what it is that I'm doing. And I'm just using this wing divider to guide me along the edge of our piece to scratch out a guideline. And I'm going to use a small chisel, which there's a difference between a chisel and a hole punch, and I'll show you. A chisel just cuts into the leather, whereas a hole punch actually removes a spot of the leather. It leaves more gapping and stuff, but go with your own preference. More often than not, I use a hole punch. This time I was going to do something a little different and use a chisel. And so I'm going to come through, and I want this to happen at a little bit of an angle, like, so not completely perpendicular, but just at a little bit of a diagonal. So there's one. And then from here, we can now size our wing divider in a little closer. And guiding off of that first hole, we can do little marks for where we want our other holes to be. And I'm going to continue marking this all the way around, and then I'm going to do my best to punch a little line all the way around. And so then I will meet you guys right back here. So now we have our top layer punched, and I'm going to want to come through and continue that punch to the bottom layer. So I've started punching, and I just want to make sure that I do actually have my stuff lined up. So I'm going to thread a straight pin through one cut and then through another cut. And I'm going to take another straight pin, and I'm going to move it along to one cut. That is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 over. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 over. Just to make sure that everything is in fact lining up. And these straight pins will hopefully help us keep everything oriented. And you can take it and just tap it in a little bit. bending the pins a little bit, but for science. And so now coming through and punching over these same holes. Being careful to not shift the project a whole lot every time. And I'm just going to continue this all the way around until we've gotten back to our beginning point. And this way we can lift and check our work and make sure that the punch is actually going through and that we aren't like accidentally chopping off the edge or something. So yeah, I'm going to keep doing this and I'll meet y'all right back here. So now the next step is going to be taking one of these flat lacing needles. Again, links for all the tools and materials will be down in the video description. But it has these really convenient little prongs and it also opens up. And so we're going to take, this is 3 30-seconds wide dark brown half round lace, and I'm doing a full arm span. I typically don't use more than a full arm span just because it makes it really cumbersome to try to lace it, but I've cut it and I've laid it on my surface, on my hard surface, and I'm using the flat edge of a craft knife to kind of skive it down a bit, because this is really going to come in handy whenever we open up our lacing needle and then we insert that in just like that. You want it lined up on the front, nothing poking out the sides. And now from here, I'm actually going to lay this down and I'm going to bonk it a bit with my rawhide mallet. And I'm doing that on my cutting board. And that just really lets those prongs penetrate. And so now I'm going to remove our bent up straight pins. I'm actually going to put in my recycling pile because I hate using, grabbing a bent pin. I'm going to use my pliers to get that one out. There we go. And so now I'm going to come in and pick at any point. I'm just going to thread through one, through the front, and then through the back. And I'm just going to pull on through. Now with this half round lace, it's very important to try to keep it to where the correct side is facing out. Oops, well there went our stone. And so to do this, I kind of re-grab it, and you can see it has like a shiny side and a dull side. I want the shiny sides to stay out. So I've grabbed it between my finger and my thumb, and I'm kind of just training it out to the tip of my needle. That way there's no twists and stuff in it. And then I'm bringing it into our next hole. There's through one layer, and then there's, where's my other hole at? There it is. Boop, just right through, pushing it. Because as you pull it down, you want to make sure that there aren't any twists. Now it's going to look like a jumbled mess, but don't let that worry you. Just kind of straighten it back out. Well, I don't know, maybe let it worry you. We'll see. And if it gets to be a little too much of a jumbled mess, just try to straighten it out with your fingers. So yeah, I still got a twist in it anyways, despite my best efforts. So what you can do is just kind of pull it through and try to get all the twists out of it and kind of get those fed through the lacing. It really makes it a lot easier if you just don't get any twists right off the bat. But you can take your pliers and grip it and twist just like that, and then as you pull through, it corrects it. See how that happened? Now that's less than ideal. I'd like to not have to do that every single time. So I am going to be very careful to try to make sure that it gets, through there okay. And so now from here, I'm going to grab it again, train it up through my fingers, and then bringing it from towards me to away from me, inserting the needle like that. And I'm just going to pull it through. And make sure it's exiting on that side of the lacing. And that gives us kind of a really nice locked edge. So I'm going to grab it. And I set my needle down and restart the lacing every time. So pull through one hole and through the next hole. Front to back. Let's see if this time if it works out any better. I hope it does. There it goes. So you can see how keeping your lace straight just really helps the whole way. Now just setting my needle down, grabbing it, pulling it back out and through. And now feeding the needle up front to back just through that little edge. Making sure it's not threading through this way, but threading through separately. That way we can just make a nice little loop. And I'm going to continue like this all the way around until we get to the halfway point, and then I'll meet y'all right back here. So I've been lacing right along. You can see I actually did a double stitch in that one right there, and you can do that however frequently as you feel necessary to keep your stitching nice and even, because you can see here it was starting to kind of lean a little bit and be a little bit more spacious than what I wanted. I plan on doing it in a little bit of a, you know, like thirds segment. But we can definitely start testing out how our stone fits in there. It's going to look kind of neat, I think. And to just continue around a few more stitches, lacing through the back, pulling it through. And the more I do it, the shorter my lacing gets and the kind of easier I feel like it becomes. So be patient with yourself and keep at it. If you find your long lace is very cumbersome, maybe you do some practice pieces with some shorter lacing first. If you have difficulty pulling the needle through, you can use an awl or the chisel to try to open the stitch hole up more, or you could use a pair of pliers or nylon jaw pliers to grab the needle and pull it on through. But you'll start to build up calluses and things and in all the right spots. Now this same lacing technique, you can see we're starting to get a little over the halfway point. So I'm going to go ahead and insert my stone before it gets too small of an opening to insert it. And I think I'm going to go ahead and do another expansion stitch. And so to do an expansion stitch, I'm just going to come in directly underneath the one we had just done, making sure it's entering and exiting the same hole. And just pulling through, making sure that there's no loops or twists in the lace. And then just treating it as though it were you know, just another hole in the pattern. You can see that gives it a really nice little expansion, kind of brings the edge around. Now you can forego this step and give it a little bit of like a weird pucker maybe. Like, I mean, experimentation is definitely recommended. But I use this same technique of lacing that we're using on this pendant as I do on my leather armor, on my stitched handbags. Like, I mean, the technique is the same regardless of the application. And that's something that I really like about a lot of the different leatherworking techniques, is you can really practice and experiment and try new things on a smaller project and then apply it to a bigger project, you know, to really get some practice in. Now, at the time of recording, I have not specifically Google searched the name of this lace technique, like this lacing pattern, I imagine I will search that and that's what I'll title the video. But this is probably, because it's not just a whip stitch. A whip stitch would be if we just did a repetitive lacing through, like if we did a stitch and then just came around and did a stitch. And that has a time and place for sure, but I really prefer this intricate patterning and how it like encases and protects the edge. I really love that. It gives it a really nice layer of texture and, you know, kind of covers up those loose edges. Some folks would use layers of glue to connect the edges first and then punch the holes and then do the lacing. I find that this works just fine though if you don't feel like doing those extra steps. At least certainly for smaller pieces like pendants. For some things like handbags or belts, I do recommend using a good contact or barge cement to kind of hold everything in together. And you can see here, if you haven't added your stone by now, it's probably too late because that's a really small opening. You'd have to go through and kind of pull some of your stitches out. Which I pull my stitches out just in absolute reverse of how I lace them. So I'd go through and I'd leave the needle on, but kind of feed it through or like hook it and kind of pull it out. So I really hate to waste the effort and hate to waste the lacing. Well, hate to waste the effort, but it keeps you from having to waste the lacing, is what I meant to say. So I'm just going to continue around. And you can see it gets much faster too now that the lacing is shorter. And just like when I'm wire wrapping, I prefer to not have to splice in more lace, so I just go ahead and start with a little bit more than what I need. Okay, so now that we're coming up on here, I'm going to get in here with my needle and hook right there. And you can see that's going to pull out this lace from the front. And so it's still going to be tucked in the back. And I'm actually just going to snip it. Boop. And then again, use my needle to kind of hide it in there. And this is different from, sometimes I'll just use this as a decorative stitch on a single layer of leather, and the way of binding off the tail on that would be a little different. So I'm going to continue this stitch around, get the knot out of my lace. And I do so much love the way that the half round lace looks. I think it gives it a really polished, professional appearance. Okay. So now we're coming through on our last one, and so I have no more stitches to do, so I'm actually going to just have this exit right there through our first stitch hole, and this is actually going to be where I have, oops, I messed up. So to take this stitch out, I'm actually going to open up my needle. And I'm just going to pull this lace on out. And this is how I undo all of my stitches whenever I mess up. Fortunately, I've gotten to where I catch it, you know, one or two stitches in as opposed to 12, 30 stitches in. It's like at what point do I just, like, I don't know, give up? Okay, so rethreading our needle, bonking it. So to keep our little double stitch, double stitch, double stitch. So I'm going to feed back through that one. This one's pretty tight, so I'm going to use my pliers to just pull it on through. Keep our lacing nice and flat. Pushing through, again, making sure that it stays on this side of the lace. Okay, so now that gives us that nice expansion. We don't have a huge gap to fill right there. And I'm going to feed through the front and then through our first stitch hole. and I'm going to pull it down. But now I'm going to thread up and through the back here, right there, if you can see. Oops, snagged my pliers. Just pulling that around, and this will help it to look cohesive. So you can kind of see it keeps that same pattern going. And now from here, if this, hush puppy, sorry, they hear a siren, so they get kind of upset. So you could just come through and tuck a few stitches on the back of your, they're gonna start howling, so I'm gonna pause it real quick. Okay, disaster averted. And so you could feed the needle through just those back stitches and then pull it through and then snip it off and kind of keep it tucked. But I'm going to see if there isn't a way that, because I think it's just going to be a little too crowded right in there. So I think this is the way we're going to go about it. If this were a wallet or a handbag, I would have been able to kind of tuck the lacing in. And there are a lot of different ways of getting this, you know, kind of finishing this stitch. And this is not necessarily the best way. And so you can see, like, this is a really lazy way of finishing it. So in lieu of doing it like this, what we can do is come back in and pull that stitch out. So we're just pulling on out on that stitch. And I want this one to be able to feed in and then back up from where this one is. So I'm going to see if I can't, yep, pull that lace out. And then trying to not scratch anything up, but pull this lace out of this little loop right here. And if I can get that one to hold its twist while we get the needle back onto here. And a lot of this really is just faking it till you make it. There are some different diagrams and stuff online that show much better ways of going about it. But sometimes you catch yourself in the thick of it and you're like, oh, good gravy, what do I do? So you can see I'd be entering just in through the top there. So I'm actually going to place that as a little bit of a stitch holder if I can. I'm actually going to get in here. If I had a leather all directly on hand, I'd be using that instead of my needle because I really don't want to break my needle. Don't want to lose that twist. But I'm just going to get in here. I'm going to hook that lacing. Kind of gently and firmly snugging it up and through. Okay, so there's that. And now let's get that twist back and going. You can see it had started to come out, but you'll just hook it in. So again, if you don't feel confident doing this way, go ahead and just hook it through the back and do it like that. And so I'm going to feed down and through. Hopefully there aren't any twists in it. Oh, they're not. How fortunate. Small blessings. Okay. So that'll just come on down. And then I'm going to hook up into here and then feed up in between the two layers. And I think this is considered more of like a proper way of doing it, but I kind of feel like do it whichever way makes you happy. I feel like this one's a little harder to work with if you're just starting out. And you can see I'm kind of wiggling and nestling and loosening and tightening things as they come and go. Trying to get it all to look very snug and repetitive and like it was supposed to happen like that. And so now I'm going to come in. I think I can get in there with my scissors and just trim those two loose ends. And you can get in a little bit closer even still with a craft knife. Kind of poke and tuck it, and there we go. There's our little pendant. And we can even squish and mold and pull. And see, this is something that I didn't want the hole to be so big that you could pop it out, because that becomes a problem. If you feel inclined, you could use a spot of glue whenever you're putting these together. Also, you'll notice I used the flesh side on the outside, the nice smooth side, as opposed to the more suede feeling inner side. And that's just personal preference. So I'm just stretching and molding and kind of getting it shaped. But you could make this, you could use this for a pin. You could use this as a decorative piece on a flap. A way that I would thread this up for a necklace is we have a double stitch here, and we have a double stitch here, and a double stitch here. Which way does it look nicest? You could come through and just hook through one of the double stitches on the back side with the remainder of your flat lace. And right there's a perfectly decent necklace that is 100% friendly for people with metal allergies. So yay. And I really like using these as focal points on necklaces that are woven up on like macrame, or, you know, just what have you, like a leather, you know, hemp weaving or macrame. So just a nice little, you know, braided leather cord, or you could use different thicknesses and colors of leather, or you could do just string your beading floss material through the back side here and have it be just a nice little you know, pendant or bead, you know, strung up on a gemstone necklace, depending on how, you know, how you feel like accessorizing it up. And so there's that, you guys. Hey y'all, thanks so much for hanging out with me during this tutorial. This is how the piece came out. I'm pretty pleased with it. Like, it's just a nice kind of simple, well, that's relative, I guess. Comparatively, we could make it way more complicated if we wanted it to, you know, if we wanted it to be more complicated. And if you guys want to put some personal flair on this, I would love to see what you make. We're putting together a Facebook group. At the time of recording, I don't think it's actually up and running yet, but keep an eye out, and we'll have a Facebook group where you can share your creations and things that you make based off of our tutorials here at Back to Earth Creations. If you have any questions, comments, or ideas, I'd love to hear from you. Please put them down in the comment area below. And if you enjoy my free tutorials and would like to support the creation of more of them, as well as participate in our fairy house giveaways and our monthly craft crates and all of the different things that we're doing here, please consider becoming a patron. Again, links are down below, and pledges start at just $1. And if you don't feel like becoming a patron but you still want to support what we're doing, just keep on crafting and enjoying yourself. And I hope that these tutorials, you know, are helpful to you and stuff. But keep on keeping on, guys. Thanks so much for watching. Happy crafting and have a good day. Bye.